One might think that art is just for the rich and pompous and the snobby, and although they can more easily enjoy it, it is a real shame when those who have a true talent for art can't really afford to pursue that. And the artist we're going to look at today, Augusta Savage, actually ran into that problem. So Augusta Savage, she's an African-American lady. She was born in 1892 near Jacksonville, Florida. She grew up in a religious home. Her dad was a pastor and actually beat her quite often as a child because she would make little sculptures out of clay, and her father would say that it's sacrilegious because it's a graven image. And so Savage was a realist sculptor, and she was a key figure in the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance during the time started in the 1920s was called a New Negro movement, and Savage moved to New York in 1921, and that's where the movement was based. It was based out of Harlem in the northern side of Manhattan in New York City. Augusta Savage, she was a really good sculptor. She helped to start the Harlem Community Arts Center, and that lasted for about 5 years, and she had some notable students including Jacob Lawrence and Gwendolyn Knight, and she had a couple of her own art galleries where she would largely show the work, her own work, but the work of her students as well. But the true tragedy comes from the discrimination she faced. Some of it was because she was black, some of it's just because she was poor. I mean, she was denied acceptance into a French art academy because she was black at one point. And then she also had her art galleries and such, but she only had them open for a few months because she didn't have the funds to keep them open. And in fact, she eventually had to retire to a rural community in New York where she raised chickens and sold eggs to make a living because she couldn't afford her true passion, which was sculpting. And also because of this, many of her sculptures do not survive because she couldn't afford to cast them in bronze, which is very expensive, understandably, but she made most of them out of clay or plaster. And today I just want to look at a few of these sculptures and see what you guys think. So the first one I want to look at is actually Untitled. It doesn't have a title, but it's a head of a Martinique woman. So Martinique, it's a territory of France. It's in the West Indies in the Caribbean. Apparently there's a movement since the 70s that they've tried to gain some independence from France, but they speak French and they speak some sort of Creole as well. And so I really like this head, probably personally just because it doesn't look American. I don't know how much experience you guys have in traveling outside of the country or where you're from, but within the United States, especially in my town, I'm in a college town, I can generally tell if someone's a black American or if they're just from Africa. And part of it is how they carry themselves, obviously their accents, but also just their style and how they keep themselves. And this head of this woman, this bust, she's obviously of African descent. She doesn't seem very Americanized, westernized, doesn't have all that Western influence and European influence. And I personally lived a couple years in West Africa and Ghana, and this looks a lot like the women there. There's school codes that they don't allow the children to grow out the hair. The boys and the girls, and lots of adult women as well, just keep their hair short like this. And it's normal over there. Here, not so much. And so the next work that I wanted to look at by her is called Realization. She calls it this because it's about slavery, which obviously is kind of a dark spot in American history that lasted for quite a while, and Savage herself was only born about 30 years after slavery and did not quite actually, but she made it because a lot of the statues seemed more triumphal, like at the end of slavery and such like that, and they don't focus on the suffering that it caused. And so this statue is actually supposed to demonstrate the suffering that the people went through, and it's rather melancholy because of this. Honestly, I don't know how you guys feel about all these Confederate statues and being removed lately. I don't necessarily blame them for being removed from public spaces, but I think that perhaps they should go in a museum rather than being tossed or burned. But I think that, if something's going to replace them, I think something like the works of Augusta Savage or whatever might actually be a good idea, as we don't shun our dark past, but that we are willing to focus on it in a way, but realize that we've done some bad things and that it hurt a lot of people, just like Augusta Savage is trying to point out through Realization. And the last one I want to look at is one of her more famous works. It's called Lift Every Voice and Sing, or also known as The Harp. It's called Lift Every Voice and Sing. It's named after what was called the Black National Anthem, which was titled Lift Every Voice and Sing, or at least the first line was that, and was actually part of the 1939 New York's World Fair that Augusta Savage was one of 2 African Americans to get sponsored to make pieces for the fair, and one of 4 women. And the piece was actually destroyed at the end of the fair because she couldn't afford to move it or store it anywhere. And so they just tore it down with the rest of the fair when it was over, sadly. So there's like small souvenir versions of it that remain, which is kind of heartbreaking. It shows African American children standing in a line and they're singing. And it's something I really like. When I lived in Ghana, one thing that I admired of the people there was that they're very religious, regardless. It's a very Christian country, but even the people that aren't Christian are still very religious, whether they're Muslim or just traditionalist. But they're comfortable in their own skin, and they like to sing, they like to dance, and they're not afraid of being seen. While I feel like in the United States, it's kind of not as acceptable, at least. It's not necessarily frowned upon, but in a way, people aren't as free-spirited, at least not publicly. And it's a little sad, but I appreciate the works that she made, and I still find it heartbreaking that she couldn't afford to do it. I want to know what you guys think of Augusta Savage, and let me know which one of these pieces do you think you like the most. There's only about 9 pieces of hers that still remain. I think Untitled is still around. I think that might be the only one of the 3. She still has a few others that you guys can look up if you're interested. But yeah, let me know, and thanks for watching, and I appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next week. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.